Enable. Recording has started. You will need to unmute yourself when you speak.
Are we ready? Are the participants in the room now, the attendees?
We have about 14 right now, Palencia.
Okay. So then I will go ahead and begin. Good evening, everyone. My name is Palencia Mobley, and I am the Deputy Director and Chief Engineer for the Detroit Water and Sewage Department. And I know this is a little different in that we usually come to you and have meetings in person. But in light of the pandemic, we're all adapting and doing things differently. And so we'd like to have a neighborhood meeting with you to discuss the West Warren Green Infrastructure and Sewer Separation Project. Next slide, please. So this evening, we're really going to do an overview of the project, talk about the team and the purpose of the project, our desired outcomes, and around how long we believe the project will take. We will then have a moment to go over questions, and then we will talk about the actual details of Parkland Street and South Rouge Park, and then we'll have additional time for discussion. Next slide, please. Just a little housekeeping business. All participants will be muted during the presentation to ensure that we have a smooth and successful discussion. We will continuously ask for your input as noted on the agenda slide provided. And if you have further questions after or during, you have the opportunity to email us at swggroup or swgroup@detroitmi.gov, or you may text at 313-573-3320. Next slide, please.
So,
Sorry.
yeah, no, you're fine. If we can go back one quick slide, for folks calling in on their phones and don't have full accesses as people using Zoom or viewing online right now, I'll read the email and the phone number for everyone to text out loud. So if you can somehow write this down, grab a pen and paper, and keep it handy with you throughout this meeting, so you can, text or email your questions. So the email is swgroup@detroitmi.gov. Again, that's swgroup@detroitmi.gov. And then the phone number to text your questions or answers to is 313-573-3320. Again, it's 313-573-3320. Right. We can go on to the next slide. So really quickly here, so we'll have two ways of asking questions and gathering your input throughout this meeting. The first will be using the raise your hand feature. So we'll do a quick test run of that right now and make sure everyone is able to do that. So the first step here, on the bottom bar of your screen, and again, this is for only the folks who are online viewing the presentation right now. You have on your bottom bar, you can see that participants button. If you click that, you should get a little pop-up on your right, on the right-hand side of your screen, and it should show all the participants of this meeting. And then there should be a raise hand button at the bottom there. So if everyone viewing online can go ahead and try and click that raise hand button, make sure it's working. So when we pause for questions throughout this presentation, we'll ask people to raise your hand and we will call on you, unmute you, and then we can go ahead and go through with the question. If you are calling in on your phone, if you press *9, that will enable your raise hand. So we'll see your hand is raised. So again, if you're on your phone, if you press *9 right now, that should show that your hand is raised. So we'll take just a couple seconds here if everybody can try this out. Okay, so it looks like we have the majority of people raising their hand. Again, if you have questions or are having issues throughout this, this is new to a lot of people. So if you're having issues with anything, you can email that email address that we just went over, or text that phone number. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. So the other way that we'll be getting input during this meeting will be through polling. So again, we're going to have a little bit difference in the people who are calling in on their phone and then the people that are viewing online through Zoom right now. The people that are calling in on their phones, you can use the phone number and the email address to respond to our questions throughout the presentation. If you are viewing if you're viewing online with Zoom, we'll go ahead and we'll launch this demo real quick of the poll. So I will launch a poll. The question is, have you heard of this project? So the poll is launched. You should have a pop-up on your screen right now asking, have you heard of this project? And then you'll have a yes or no answer. We'll give everyone about a minute and a half here to respond. Okay, maybe we'll give everyone a minute to respond. Looks like we have a good number of people that have responded. So we'll end the polling. And so we will not be sharing the results during this meeting, but this will be recorded. So we have 88% of the folks, I'll just let everyone know, 88% of the folks have heard of this project. Okay.
And at one point on that, Marguerite, one of the reasons that we're going to collect the data, we also want to make sure that the folks that are calling in that don't have the option to vote can still offer their opinion. So we mentioned it a few slides ago that we have a phone number and email address. Feel free to either text or email your vote or any other opinions to those addressed. Again, the phone number for texting is 313-573-3320. And the email was swgrup@detroitmi.gov.
Great, thanks, Patrick.
Yep. And with that, we'll go to do an introduction of everyone on the call today.
Patrick, I'm sorry. Let me go. This is Palencia. Let me go back and do overview because I think there was a little bit of confusion on my part regarding the order in which we were going in. I didn't see a bullet point for administrative items on the bullet the list. So just to give everyone an actual overview of the project for those who have or have not heard of it, this is a $28 million multi-year investment in the West Warren neighborhood to significantly reduce untreated combined sewage discharges. We will install over 5 miles of new sanitary and storm sewers that will both capture and convey sewage and stormwater runoff. To be clear, the storm sewer will be separated so that we will no longer have combined sewage in this area. We will also create 2 very natural stormwater features within Rouge Park, which will assist with the water quality in the Rouge River. In addition, there will be restoration to neighborhood streets, including new pavement, as well as implementation of traffic calming in specific intersections to improve pedestrian walkability as well as connections to the park. We also have done a neighborhood-wide as needed assessment for water main and rehab of existing combined sewer infrastructure. And so through that particular process, we will be investing approximately $5 million for some water main replacement and sewer system upgrades. And so with that, I would like to go ahead and turn it over to Patrick, who will introduce the entire team.
Thanks, Palencia. So you've met a few of us so far, but we have quite a few others on the line from the City of Detroit, as well as the Detroit Water Sewage Department and the City of Detroit General Services Department. So we've heard from Palencia earlier. We also have Lisa Wallach, Barry Brown, and Sarah Stuhlmiller from the DWSD Stormwater Management Group. And we're also joined by Mona Ali, who is the District 7 Manager for the Department of Neighborhoods. And we also have on the line Jeff Klein, as well as Rachel Landrum from the General Services Department, which oversees Rouge Park. And then myself, Marguerite, and Greg Kozvinsky are with OHM Advisors, and we are a civil engineering and planning and landscape architecture firm that was hired by DWSD last year to help advance projects like this within the City of Detroit. And we are going to flip ahead here to touch a little bit more on what this project is, why we're doing it. And I'm going to kick it to Greg for a few points here.
All right, hopefully you all can hear me. The reason it's quiet on my end is I've bribed my children with excessive amounts of candy. So hopefully they'll stay quiet until the sugar rush hits, and then I have no idea what's going to happen, so I'll be quick. So Palencia covered, the main points of this project. The key reason that DWSD, the City of Detroit, is doing this project is they're meeting a specific permit obligation they have with the State Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. It's now called EGLE. It used to be called MDEQ. Anyway, as part of that permit, the city is obliged to invest money in green stormwater infrastructure to reduce the amount of combined sewage that discharges into the Rouge River and Detroit River and other water bodies. So this project has basically a dual benefit. Not only is it going to help to enhance water quality on the Rouge River by decreasing the amount of combined sewage that goes to the river. And by the way, that combined sewer overflow for this project is is at Warren Street, where it crosses the Rouge River. So that's where it goes in. This project is going to drastically reduce the frequency of those discharges and the total volume that goes to the river. So that's a very good outcome. The other benefit is that we can reduce neighborhood flooding. No amount of infrastructure will eliminate the flooding potential, but we talked to a lot of you who live in this neighborhood about it. There are many cases where the neighborhood or portions of the neighborhood flood when it rains a lot. This project is going to reduce the frequency of that flooding quite a bit by opening the throat and allowing that stormwater when it rains to get to the river quickly, a lot more efficiently, and hopefully that will reduce roadway flooding and also reduce potential for backups into any basements too. So there are a lot of benefits from an environmental standpoint and a flood improvement standpoint. And the next slide, Patrick, I think is kind of rehashing a lot of what I just said. But the way we're going to do it, and Patrick will go into the details of that, is instead of sending all the rainwater into the combined sewer, we're going to remove almost all of that and put it into a new sewer system, which is the system we're going to install. And Patrick will talk to you about where or how that system is going to work and how it's going to help protect you. With that, I'll pass it back to you, Patrick.
Thanks, Greg. So what Greg kind of talked about is some of the why questions about why the project is going to occur. And now we can talk a little bit about what does that look like. When we talk about doing separation of neighborhood sewer systems, it's typically a pretty intense project relative to the infrastructure that's needed for that. And in our case, we're looking at an area that's approximately 218 acres. So when we look at this neighborhood, Far West neighborhood, our project is really going to span the vast majority of it. So the storm sewer portions are going to start on the south at Majestic Avenue and extend all the way up to Parkland on the north side. Our west limits will be West Parkway, and then the east limits will be Parkland as well. The vast majority of that storm sewer work is going to happen within the streets, but we are going to need to get that to the river. So as we mentioned earlier, there's going to be points where we're going to need to have some impacts within Rouge Park. And that is going to allow us to create stormwater management systems that are going to help to reduce the, or improve the water quality before it's discharged into the Rouge River. And so we'll be doing two practices, one up near Constant Street, which is on the north side of the project, and then a second will be constructed roughly between Majestic and Sawyer, extending over to Outer Drive. And then there will be a single outfall storm sewer only pipe that goes to the Rouge River. And so through this project, when we put in new storm sewer, there's going to be impacts, but most of that, if not all, is going to be happening within the road right away. And that's because we need to put in the new sewer to collect the road runoff and the catch basins and intercept some of the sewers that are dedicated right now to storm sewer only. Because of the nature of how things were constructed, we'll also be constructing new sanitary sewers that will serve as combined sewers on Sawyer and Majestic, and those will go end to end. And then after we get done with our work, we're going to be restoring to condition equal or better to current conditions. So let's talk about outcomes. So what does $28 million worth of storm sewer and stormwater investment look like? It's going to result in some pretty significant improvements within the neighborhood. As I mentioned prior, the infrastructure necessary to manage a 218-acre neighborhood is pretty significant. So some of these pipes will be in excess of 6 foot in diameter. So in order to do that, we're going to be digging some fairly substantial excavations within the street right away, but we'll be restoring on top of that. And so the goal of that is that we do it in a methodical way. We build our new sewers, we reconnect, and then we quickly thereafter restore. And what will happen is streets that are currently concrete will be concrete, asphalt streets will be asphalt. And then there's a few streets such as Sawyer and Majestic where it's actually an old gravel road that was overlaid with asphalt some years ago, That'll be replaced with asphalt as well. We're going to add curb and gutter to help make sure that the drainage is maintained and to prevent any issues with pavement raveling on the edges. So what does that do for us with all that investment? Well, the first thing we talked about is certainly going to have improvements for the drainage system. So where you might see ponding of water on a street like Parkland here in this photo, because our new storm sewer system is going to be designed to modern standards, it's going to be able to manage these much more intense rain events that we've been seeing over the last few decades, actually. And so by using new modern design standards, we're going to make sure that the water that falls into these streets can be removed as quickly as possible to reduce the occurrence of street flooding. And by also us pulling that stormwater out of the combined system, it's going to have also positive effects on issues with any sort of basement flooding. With effectively us drying out that combined sewer system, the frequency of those events should go down significantly as those new infrastructure is put online. So what other things might we see as part of this? Well, because of some of the significant work that's going to occur on streets like Parkland, we're going to have the need to reconstruct intersections. So there's opportunities when we do that we can put back the sidewalk system and potentially even include some enhancements. So if there's a desire to maybe provide a few more connections to Rouge Park to start to set the table for future improvements, those are things that we can do as part of this project. We talked about Rouge Park. Because we're going to have some fairly substantial investments within Rouge Park to help manage our stormwater and improve water quality, we have a responsibility to put it back in a way that is going to potentially set the table again for future improvements within the park and also establishing sustainable landscapes. So we're going to be doing that as part of our design to make sure that the stormwater basins and channels are done in a way that can be maintained and are sustainable in nature. So certainly $28 million is a significant investment, and the area that we're serving is large. With the neighborhood extending almost a mile end to end, we have to be methodical in how we do that. And so as part of our design process, which we currently find ourselves basically at the end of, we are going to be setting forth in our project documents a way that makes sure that this is done by the contractors in a way that makes sense, that we start downstream and then work upstream, and also the fact that we're not spread out across the neighborhood. You know, when we sent out our postcards for this, we sent out almost 1,400 individual postcards. So each one of those addresses is a home with people that have busy day to day, getting to work, dropping kids off at school. We know that making sure that we are doing the right things and making sure that if we have a street closed, the next street is available so you can still get in and out of your subdivision and on time is important. So having a methodical approach to how we do that is going to result in a little bit of an extended duration, which is going to go roughly to 2026 as we do this improvement. And it will be working, again, methodically. So your street might be constructed in 2022, and after that, we should be moved on and we shouldn't have a need to really be back on your street anytime soon after that. So that in mind, there will be work going on for a number of years, but the individual impact to you as a homeowner is really intended to be as short as possible. And we're going to set up our contracts to make sure that happens. So we just went over quite a bit of information about what's going to happen in the neighborhood. And we'll talk a little bit more about Rouge Park in a few minutes. But we thought this would be a good point in time to take a pause and open it up to questions. So again, for those on the phone, you can raise your hand by dialing *9. Or if you're on the web platform, there is a raise hand button on the bottom of the screen. So if we can have any questions now, we'll give ourselves 10 minutes here and we'll start to answer those. And what we'll do is we will call your name and then we'll unmute you and you can ask your question. Marguerite, do you want to run through these? It looks like we have one question so far.
Yep. So Harris LT just unmuted you, so you can go ahead and ask the question.
Looks like he's still on mute.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, my name is Arthur Edge. I am president of Far West Detroit Civic Association and vice president of Friends of Rouge Park. And we're going to do just a little history right here, what has gone over here with DWSD in these projects. I don't know how many tens of millions of dollars they spent with that tunnel project that was canceled that greatly impacted my community. Then they came back and they did this bioswale on Tireman. And with all this rain we just got recently, I have not seen any water in that bioswale. That greatly impacted my community. And I don't know how much that project costs. But with the money that was spent since the project has been done, it has not held any water. So before we start any future projects, can we get some of them that you have done completed and fix that function properly? Yes, this is going to greatly impact that 1,400 homes you're talking about is Far West Detroit Civic Association. And this project is going to be over the next 6 years. And it's going to greatly impact my community. But I haven't seen anything that has worked yet on this DWSD projects. I understand that the reason why, but with this last rain, a lot of areas in Rouge Park was flooded. The river was all the way up to the bottom of the bridges, but there was no water in these bioswales that the project that you put in about 3 years ago on Tireman. And every time we have one of these meetings, I ask about this project, why is it not holding water? Because to my understanding, it was supposed to hold water and drain slowly back into the earth. But this past week with the park flooded, no water in the bioswale. I'm finished. Can we answer that?
Well, oh, Lisa, are you going to take that, or do you?
Yes, I can take that. The bioswale, we were just out there inspecting it either today or yesterday, and it is holding water, not a lot of water on purpose because it's supposed to drain within 24 hours. We do have pictures of it holding water. It is under drained, so it is supposed to drain, and that is its function. And we're working to do corrective action on it. But it is still functioning partially, even though the corrective action hasn't been able to be completed due to the pandemic. So
Arthur, if you recall, when that bioswale first went in, it did not have what we call under drains in it.
Okay.
And there also was an issue in terms of when it was constructed with respect to the level of compaction that happened for the flowable field. I shouldn't call it flowable field, but for the field that is part of the bioswale for how it should infiltrate. So then we went back and put under drains in it because initially there was a ponding issue associated with the bioswales. So Lisa has more of the detail regarding any additional corrections that need to be made. And Lisa, can you correct me if I'm wrong, the particular contractor that was the lead contractor for this project ended up having some different issues occur in terms of us being able to get responsiveness out of them, correct?
yes, that is correct.
Okay, so there are also some things, Arthur, unfortunately, that were not under DWD's direct control as it relates to the contractor who actually won the award. And so we will continue to do what we need to do, but none of the bioswale is not supposed to be a water feature. It is very different than what we are talking about for this other part of the project. It's not a water feature. It is designed to drain within 24 hours. If you go to any of the other vacant lot bioretention projects that we've done, or any of the other swales that are in any of the other park projects, none of them actually hold water. They're not water features or attractive water features in that nature. They only slow down and detain the rate at which the water actually hits the combined sewer system. In this case, these will eventually let out to the river.
Okay, Valencia, and I hope you're being safe. So from what you're just saying is that the bioswale is functioning 100% now like it's supposed to?
I'm not saying it's 100%. Lisa has more of the detail on. I think there are some nitpicky, I don't want to call them nitpicky, but some specific items that do need some correction for the tireman pieces that come into the bigger ones that probably are also affecting how much water it appears to have.
Okay.
Yeah, so the bioswale is mostly acting as it is intended to, but it has not been, it has not been planted properly, which will help with the infiltration process. So there is corrective action that needs to be had, and there was invasive species that need to be dealt with. So, but the water and its draining and all that, that's functioning as designed. But as you know, the aesthetic part of it is not complete, which also helps with our infiltration.
Do we have a projected date when that may be complete?
As I stated, there's an issue with the existing contractor and their viability, for lack of a better way to say it. And so we don't hold that contract. It's held through the program manager who did the design on the contract. So we are trying to work with them on that piece to get the corrections done. But we will see what we can do. If we can't, we may have to go to another methodology. We're trying to get the things done that we, want to be completed.
Okay, as you know, I work in the city of Palencia, and when our demo contractors don't do what they're supposed to do, we go after their bond, and I'm probably quite sure they have a bond, and this has been a 3-year project.
We just don't. Yeah, we as DWSD don't hold that specific contract. So the program manager actually holds the contract and would have to pull the performance bond. However, people were trying to be accommodating because there were some other issues that were going on with the owner in light of the pandemic and COVID, to say it nicely.
Yeah, I understand. COVID just happened 2 months ago. This has been going on for 3 years.
Not this piece has not been going on for 3 years. The issues with this contractor themselves has been at least a year, if not 2. And I'm saying, in addition to that, the contractor themselves contracted COVID. I'm just going to be very honest. So it now created another hurdle.
All right. Well, can I get something and some definite kind of timeline what's going to be happening? Because I have to answer to those 1,400 people that you are on 1,400 homes, probably over 3,000 people that this impact. Yeah. So Lisa will know something more concrete, hopefully in the coming weeks. Okay. About how we're going to proceed on our end of it. And so she will be able to give an update probably in a couple weeks. Okay. Well, that's it. Between my community and the Friends of Rouge Park, there are a lot of questions that's being asked about projects that have started and totally are not complete. And we're starting a new project that is impacting Far West Detroit Civic Association community and Friends of Rouge Park. Okay, I'm finished. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Arthur. So it looks like I am going to mute, and then James, you should now be unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, Arthur, for that question. It's something that I had some questions about myself, so I'm glad to get that feedback. That was great. And obviously, I'm one of the 1,400 in the neighborhood, the homes. My question, I have 2 of them. They're pretty quick. One is, as pertains to the roads being torn up and redone, is that just a Majestic in Parkland, or is that going to be, I live on Beaverland. Is Beaverland going to be redone?
Good question. So we kind of talk about Majestic and Parkland and Sawyer because those are going to be very substantial trunk sewers. It depends where you are at on Beaverland. Much of the existing catch basins north and south of kind of our major east-west trunks will remain in place. So we'd have to know, kind of specifically where you're at.
Basically right at Parkland. It runs into Parkland.
And I'm sorry, what was your street again?
Beaverland, where it runs right
Oh,
into,
yeah. Okay.
it's almost the second house from, actually the first house facing Beaverland.
Yes, we are going to be doing work right at that corner. So it'll probably extend south from the intersection a couple 100 feet. But in that case, it'll be basically just a sewer down the road to pick up a few catch basins. So it'll be a small sewer, but we will be impacting the road.
Now, will they be redoing my street or as
So
a result of that?
What the work to kind of maybe define how the road work will happen. If we can do work on one half of the road, that will be the preferred way of doing it. So we may, for instance, if we're putting a new sewer down a side street, that'll run maybe right on the curb line or a few feet off if we're trying to save some of the larger trees in the neighborhood. We'll take to the center line of the road and rebuild that half. If that sewer needs to be right down the middle because of existing utilities, then the whole road would get rebuilt. So
The reason I ask is I have my neighbor and myself have an area right by the curb that holds water all the time. Not after every rain event, it holds water and then gets dirty and it's just sort of disgusting. So I'm hoping that this will resolve that, because I think it's a road issue. I think it's not level right in that area.
So it certainly depends on, again, where are we doing our work? If we were coming through there with new sewer and it's going to take out that pavement, we're going to put it back in a way to make sure that it has good, consistent grade to it, that the curbs are going to be able to move that water.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
My other question was about I think there's a mention of it actually as pertains to the bioswales not being water features. Are there going to be water features in the park in this plan?
We'll talk about that in a few slides,
Okay.
but there will be, I'll call them stormwater features. That's probably a better way to talk about it. And we'll show you some details of that in a few minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Good questions. Thank you.
All right. So Daniel, we'll get to your question right now, and then we'll probably want to move on with the slides after this question. But again, if you have further questions, we will have more opportunities during the presentation to ask those, and then also you can email and text questions as well. Daniel, you should be unmuted now. Okay.
Daniel Graustein, did you have a question?
All right. Daniel, if you have it, just feel free to raise your hand again, and we can get back to it. So I think for now, we should be good. No more questions.
Okay, thanks. With that, we will now move into the second part of our presentation. As we just kind of mentioned, and I am seeing just one note. There was a Q&A item that was posted. Sally Petrella, and I think it's mentioning about Constance north of Joy, not in this map. And I'm assuming that's going back to our slide that had project map on it. So this street right here, oops, sorry, is Constance, and Parkland bends around here. So this is where Constance is. So the stormwater basin that we'll talk about in a few minutes is actually located right here. So not sure if that answers your question, Sally, but certainly raise your hand if we need more detail on that. Because this is a perfect transition, because that's our next topic is work within Rouge Park. So as we just talked about, there's going to be a significant amount of work within the neighborhood over a few years to help to collect that stormwater, primarily from the road surfaces. So just one other final point on our infrastructure in the neighborhood. The majority of runoff in this particular neighborhood is coming from our streets because they collect not only the drainage from the roads, but we're also having sidewalks. Most of your driveways pitch back towards the street. And a lot of times you might have your downspouts disconnected. So, you know, we see it's pretty common that whether it's an issue with a footing drain potentially, or just finding it's maybe the right way to do it, downspouts just get disconnected and those might flow down your driveway. So with that, even if it's just the front, we're now picking up half of your roof in the neighborhood. So that's where the majority of this stormwater is coming from. But because some of that is going to have road drainage in it, we know that that can be more susceptible to having, you know, various types of, you know, oils and dirts and that types of things. So before we discharge that stormwater to the Rouge River, there's an important step necessary to make sure we're advancing the ball a little bit more on water quality, not just reducing the occurrence of combined sewer overflows to the Rouge River, but also doing some work to improve the stormwater that's flowing out of our system to the Rouge River. So in order to do that, there's been some designs developed that would do that in the form of naturalized stormwater management practices. But before we talk about those, we wanted to kind of hit some of our high-level goals that we established at the start of design that help guide our design decisions and our approaches to how we would restore the project when we're complete. So within Rouge Park, we really wanted to try to limit the amount of disturbance that we had to make. So we're going to be respectful of existing elements within the park, the butterfly garden, prairie trail, existing trees, other amenities that exist within the park. We want to know where those are at and try to work around them as much as possible. When we complete our work, we want to do that in a way that's sustainable. So environmentally sustainable is important, but also economically sustainable. So we need to put in landscapes that can be realistically maintained by DWSD and GSD. And also we want to have the plantings that, if we can have them, that are beneficial to the environment, potentially creating habitat that might not be there already. And then we also want to make sure that whatever we do, that this design complements the Far West neighborhood and brings that together with Rouge Park if that's a desire of the neighborhood. So there's going to be three specific impacts that we're going to talk about today. Two of them we're going to get your feedback on, and those are Area B, and that's Parkland Street. Area C is what we're calling South Rouge Park. We'll start with Area A, and this is the Constance Basin that we just talked about a few minutes ago based on the question we had. There was some discussion that there was some work done on the north part of the neighborhood. And this was started back in 2016 with some designs that looked at finding areas that could be disconnected. So we mentioned that this neighborhood, again, of roughly 1,300 homes, is over a 216 acre area. Well, 16 of those acres drain to this northern portion that we call the Constance Stormwater Basin. And a few years ago, there was some new storm sewer put down Constance that was installed with the intention of eventually connecting that to a dedicated stormwater outfall. So right now that goes to the combined sewer system, but as part of this project, we'll finish it to divert that from the combined system into a new stormwater management practice. Now this particular area on the north side has some existing assets that we're trying to work around. We've talked about the butterfly garden and prairie pathway. Through working with partners with GSD and Friends of Rouge Park, we've identified those and found a spot where we can do our improvement. We're also trying to maintain existing hydrologic patterns as much as possible. And when I say hydrologic patterns, we're really talking about the watershed of a certain smaller area. You know, different areas of environments are impacted by how much water or how little water gets to a certain area, specifically like things like wetlands, that type of thing. So we don't want to totally remove a drainage area if it's influencing, say, a wetland or some other high quality environmental area. So that was part of the design. So what was developed back in that time frame was to locate a relatively compact, but about a 15-foot deep stormwater management practice. And so we had a question a few minutes ago about, and that was from James, about whether we would have a water feature. And this is going to be the case for both of these stormwater management practices. They are intended to allow the stormwater to pass through the system, but we're going to drain it down in a relatively quick period of time. The water's not going to be sitting for days on end. And in fact, the goal is we are going to manage the peak flow and then discharge it to the Rouge River. And in that process, we're going to use that to help remove those oils and dirts from the water, to make sure it's clean before it goes to the Rouge, but we're not looking to hold the water over extended periods of time. And so that'll be the case with this particular basin, as well as one we'll talk about in a minute. So the next area to talk about is Parkland Street. So if you're familiar with Parkland Street, along its length, starting at Warren heading north, we have a road that's fairly wide. And so right now, it's roughly 40 feet between the curbs. So there's a lot of room and real estate to do utility work, which is good news because we have large diameter storm sewer that we have to run, extending pretty much all the way, starting at Belton, all the way south to Sawyer, where we join up with our stormwater practice. We also have to intercept storm sewers from the side streets. So in much of these areas, we have storm sewers that will run down the street to pick up catch basins and you know, potentially some other storm sewers that might exist. But we have to bring those into this, what I'm calling a trunk sewer that we're going to put in down Parkland Street. So this amount of work is going to generate some fairly significant impacts to the road. So as we talked about before, when we're going to be impacting a road like this, we're most likely going to be potentially in the center of the road. So it's going to be essentially a full reconstruction of that roadway. But when we put that back, the question comes to mind, should we put back what's there, or should we do something that maybe is a little more sensitive to some of the pressures and concerns of the neighborhood? So when we look at Parkland, this is kind of our option one. And this is something just, if you recall at the beginning of the meeting, we did talk about there's going to be a few items to vote on. This is the first one. So when we look at Parkland, again, we talked about how right now you have a road that is between our 2 points here. Excuse me, sorry, go back. We have from this edge all the way over to this existing point is 40 feet wide. And so that accommodates 2 travel lanes. We have parking on the home side. And then there's also a parking lane on the Rouge Park side. Currently it's signed, there's not to be any standing after dark, but it's usable as a parking space during the day. But based on our review, visiting the site multiple times, it is used, but infrequently. So could there be an option where if we did the sewer down Parkland, that we could reduce that? And so what would be the benefit of reducing the pavement? Well, when we talk about stormwater management, one of the things that we try to do is reduce the amount of impervious surface, because impervious surface generates more water than pervious. Think about how much water would be coming off your house, off your roof versus your grass. If we're doing stormwater management, we want more grass than we want pavement. And so this is an opportunity to still have a functioning road. We take that 40 foot down to a 32 foot, much like all the other streets in the neighborhood. So we still have a functioning road, but we have less pavement. The other benefit of reduced roadway cross-section is that by doing this, it'll have a traffic calming impact. We found in other projects that we've done, if you narrow the road, it requires the drivers to be a little more careful and speeds naturally go down. So this is a potential option that's really becoming a sort of a win-win for the neighborhood, because we are reducing the amount of stormwater runoff. We're hopefully slowing speeds, and we're putting a new roadway in as part of it. The other thing to note on this particular option, the trees all remain as is, and we're actually generating an additional 8 foot of real estate for Rouge Park as part of this. And again, the sewer is right underneath the road. So a second option, and this is again something we'll ask your feedback on, is what if we took that storm sewer and moved it into Rouge Park? The benefits of that is that we no longer are impacting the road, and Parkland Street was repaved only a few years ago. So in this case, we can leave pavement as is, not really have any significant impacts to that, other than the side streets where we have to run our sewers in, as we talked about earlier. But then we move our sewer further enough east into Rouge Park on the other side of the existing line of vegetation that we have an opportunity to put the sewer in an area. We may have to take out some trees. There's unfortunately no getting around that. But we could put back the sewer and then restore the area around it, turf grass, and we could also include an aggregate pathway that provides a nice north-south connection pretty much along the entire length of Rouge Park, extending all the way, again, from Belton Street south to the southern basin that we talked about we'll talk about in a few minutes. So these are kind of two distinct options. The benefit again of this is we're not impacting relatively new pavement. We're doing work that's going to be in a neighborhood, off the neighborhood streets, and potentially creating an amenity that could also use as a maintenance pathway for DWSD service vehicles to do periodic inspections on the new storm sewer that's put in place. So we did talk about how this option 2 wouldn't necessarily have the ability to really narrow the pavement, but could we still do something at these intersections where we have to run our new storm sewer? And so what was developed was potentially doing traffic calming measures. Could we bring the roadway width to a narrower point to, again, force drivers to slow down at these intersections, and then potentially also create the opportunity for a pedestrian connection into the park? That's something that could be added. It could not be added if not desired by the neighborhood, but this would just show you kind of what that would look like. And this would be, again, something that we could be doing as part of this project. Because we're already going to be tearing up this intersection to run our new sewers across, whether that's under Parkland or in the park. So to summarize the two options again, option 1, sewer in Parkland Street. We're going to reduce the road width, hopefully get some speed control as part of that. We can do crosswalks, and we'll reconstruct the roadway between the curbs. The impacts, there's going to be a significant impact for people living on Parkland Street. Again, we talked about the large diameter storm sewer. It is a pretty impactful operation. We'll try to maintain access to homes as much as possible, but there's going to be times when there may be periods of times of hours that you may not necessarily be able to get in and out of your driveway. And that's going to be a longer duration as well, because construction within a street footprint where we have utilities to worry about tends to go slower than construction in the park. So within the park, our changes are, so we are going to need to do some tree removal. There are some defined corridors, but the reality is that the sewer is going to have to be fairly straight, and we're going to need roughly a 50-foot wide corridor to build that. So there would be some tree loss, but we would be able to restore that area around it. We talked about the option of doing, again, those intersection crosswalks and traffic calming, and the ability to create a north-south access pathway that could also be used for DWSD maintenance purposes. And the construction impacts we anticipate would be reduced just because the work would be within the park. So two fairly distinct options, but relative to our project, they accomplish the same goal. So with that in mind, we then turn it first to questions before we go to the polling. So again, if anyone has questions, this is the time to raise hands, and we'll try to answer those questions.
All right, Sally, you should be unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, I really like option 1. It fits with the Friends of Rouge Park master plan, which is actually doing a lane diet in other parts of Rouge Park, like Outer Drive, where we have 4 lanes on a road that really only needs 2 lanes, and we don't need all that excess paved surfaces. So I really like, and also, Parkland was originally just a 30-foot road, and then in 1950s, it was widened, but clearly there's not a big need for it. I'll let anybody in the neighborhood respond to that. So I really like option 1, but I also like the connections into the park. And I'm wondering if you could do, and the aggregate pathway, because that's also kind of a long-term vision for the park, to have an aggregate pathway around the entire perimeter of the park. So I'm wondering if option 1 could be done, but the pathway and the kind of the better entrance from the neighborhood to the park, as well as the traffic quieting too, because anybody who lives in the neighborhood has huge complaints about people that just want to speed through, and kids get hit all the time. So anything that we can do to reduce speeds to the neighborhoods where people live. So could you take the best of both and combine for a better option? And I'll turn off.
I think what we'll do is we'll collect the feedback here, and I think maybe at the end we can talk to that. But so certainly what we heard there is we like the option 1 because it aligns with some of the Rouge Park goals, but do you like some of the connectivity to the park as well, and kind of an ask for what you kind of called the best of both. So thank you for the question.
All right, so Dankert, you should be unmuted. Or not yet. All right.
I think so. When we unmute you, I think you as the participant do have to unmute your system as well. So Dan, Kurt, you may be getting a prompt. There you go.
Yep.
Hello? Hello?
Yep. Go ahead.
Did you hear any of that?
No, we just were able to get you unmuted.
Okay. In that diagram for option 1, where you had the traffic calming at the intersection, you also narrowed the intersection from the park side. Would it be feasible? In this neighborhood, we have our speedsters. At my block, just this past week, somebody took out 2 vehicles parked on the street. For the people that live on Parkland, to do the traffic calming from the that residential side, so that those intersection extensions out into the street would be entirely from the residential side, and that way there'd be a little bit more protection from the traffic. There'd be essentially, you could run a stripe, and the stripe would to the curb would encompass entirely people parking at the curb. That makes sense what I'm asking?
Let me try to repeat it. I think, are you asking about whether we could do this type of, I'll call it bump in on the side street? Is that what you're asking?
Well, on this diagram that you have here, you have the park side extended into the intersection, because you keep the existing curb and do the bump entirely from the residential side. And so then parking on the residential side will be more protected from traffic.
Okay. I understand what you're saying. You're saying don't do it on both sides, just do all the bump on this side over in this area here. So
yes,
this is what you're asking. Okay. Good question. I don't know the answer to it specifically. We will have to run that by traffic engineering with the DPW group. But we can forward that question. Go ahead.
Okay, and then secondly, since we're doing this, if we would do this option, have the parking lane, and also then on the traffic side of that, put in marked bicycle lanes. We got a park here. People might like to ride along the exterior of the park and to get to areas in the park. And so that would give them the bicyclists some dedicated space too.
That's another question we'd have to ask of the traffic engineering department. And one of the other things that from DWSD's perspective, all the ideas that we've thrown out so far are relatively essentially the same cost to DWSD. We have to be very careful and respectful about ratepayer dollars. So if we can do a project that costs the same either way, that's not an issue. But if we start adding to it, we have to be very careful about what dollars are spent on. But we can certainly talk to traffic engineering and whether there could be a need for that. But good question.
Yeah, I don't see that the cost would vary from modifying it in this way.
Okay.
And then another question on option 2, moving it to the park. Sally and I are familiar with a option, and I talked to Barry about this. There's a native species orchid in the park. After all the things that have gone through the park, the missile installation and et cetera, and all the modifications the landscape has taken. Lo and behold, there's this patch of native species orchids, and maybe she has some input on this for the option where the main would run in the park, if that would run into this patch. Do you know, Sally?
And that's something that I guess there's additional study for this option if we consider it further. We would need to do a tree assessment, and then any sort of known sensitive environmental or species would be identified as part of that.
Well, the thing with this environmental assessment is these orchids, their growth cycle is they put up their foliage in the springs and then store up their energy, and in the fall, like in September, they put their flower up. So you would have to do an assessment at a very specific time.
Okay. It sounds like there's been a conversation between Sally and Barry on that. So we will follow up on that if we look further at option 2.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Harris, can unmute yourself. And we do have Jason that I'm seeing also with their hand raised, so we'll get that, and then we'll move on. And again, if you have further questions, just the email or a text.
Hello again, this is Arthur. Option 1 and option 2 will greatly impact Far West Detroit Civic Association and Rouge Park. But the main thing, whatever option you choose, on Parkland between Majestic and Sawyer, there's a gentleman that lives across the street, and he keeps that area of the park like a golf course. And that is where Far West Detroit Civic Association has their annual picnic every year. So I want to make sure either way you go, whether you go with the road or in the park, that that area is brought back to the status that it is now, so that we can continue doing, and in respect for him, he has been maintaining that year after year. If you go through there now, just south of the bioswale on Tireman, and it looks like a golf course. So I want to make sure that that is still kept to that status. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edge. And we will be talking more about that exact area later in the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the heads up on it.
All right, Jason, if you can unmute yourself.
I had a question regarding option 2. If that was the selected option, wouldn't that require each of the sewers at the cross street to be dug into the park too? But if you're talking, I believe in the preliminary plans, like for example, on some of the streets, by the time I got to the park, you were looking at almost 6-foot diameter pipe. So every time you needed to make a connection to that pipe that was running through the park, you would have to go all the way into the park and disturb more of the park, would you not?
100% correct. So this, if you notice here on this particular view, here's our cross street, and note that in this area up in here, we're going to have to basically clear a corridor to get that new sewer put in. And depending on the sewer size, I'm going to say at a minimum, that's going to be a 20-foot wide corridor. In some instances, that is not a particularly heavily vegetated area. Some it is. So obviously, we would try to do what we can to avoid any impacts, but to say that there would not be loss of vegetation at the intersections, I couldn't tell you that today. But that's a good question, and you are 100% accurate.
That's all I have.
Okay. We did get a question over text as well. And I'm just going to read that right now. I think we have another hand raised, but I'll just propose this one here. The question is, work will only be done in roadway by the houses and not requiring trees cut down on house side. Is that correct? So our intention is, and maybe we'll go to the section option 1 view here. So in this particular cross section here, we are going to center that sewer right in the road, and we set that at a point where we don't have to have an impact beyond the back curb. So we may impact some driveways, but really just more the fact that if we have to take out the curb, we have to fix the driveway usually. But we do not anticipate impacting trees on either side under option 1 by contractor operation. If there's some other need outside of storm sewer work, potentially, but relative to the storm sewer we're proposing, we are not anticipating to impact those trees.
Patrick, I will just add to that, this is Lisa Waller talking, that our water team also tries to avoid trees. So we are replacing water main as well as part of the project, and we'd have to confirm that the water main will also not affect trees.
Yep, exactly. We have another question, but maybe we will get Gina Ross's hand raised, Marguerite. Get that question, then we'll go to the text question.
Yep, Gina, you should be unmuted.
Yes, my concern is with option 1, flooding. I'm worried about the basements flooding. Last time when you worked on Constance all of the basements flooded. So I'm worried about that option one. Would that cause the flooding? Should we perhaps look at option two more? And I really don't have a problem with option one, except I do not want the residents' basements to flood.
I can say relative to construction, neither of these options would affect in any way whether there is more or less basement flooding. Obviously, once our sewer goes in, because we'll be removing stormwater from the combined sewer, we're going to greatly reduce the chance of flooding. I can't speak to what happened on Constance, but we would not anticipate there would be any impact to the combined sewer that would cause flooding as part of either option. DWSD has any additional points on that?
Sorry, I think and I were coming off of mute at the same time. When you talked about Constant Street in the basement backing up, when was this? Ms. Ross?
That would have been 2 years ago.
And was it during a wet weather event?
It was when the street was redone.
That may have been precipitated by something else. And so 2 years ago, meaning circa 2018 or 2017?
I believe it was 18.
Let me check with DPW and we can find out what specifically was done. You're saying it's strictly from when the street was just repaved?
It had a lot to do with when they were working on that other end, like Parkland comes in at the bottom of the street. So I don't know. I would have to get more information on it too, exactly what year that was.
Okay, if you could, 'cause I don't know that we have done anything specific as DWSD in that area. Not to you, but I could be wrong. So,
but I will check with the residents tomorrow and then we can go further with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Ross, I have a quick question on that. Was that one basement or were there multiple basements that were flooded?
Multiple.
Okay.
It was all of them.
This is Barry. That would be some good information to get to us. The Constance project, there was some prep work done. A part of the DPW that was part of the DWSD design for this future work that's going in. And we may just have to assess what happened there if you can get us that information.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. It may have
also just been a coincidence.
Right, it could be a coincidence. Yes, but you could get us the specific time frame and whether or not any of those residents made a complaint to DWSD, because I don't recall hearing about this at whatever time it may have occurred, then that will help us, because I think the Constant Street project was actually done circa 2016 or 2017. So the more details you can get us, it will help us better understand and assess what may have happened.
And Ms. Ross, certainly a good spot to email or send comments again is at swgroup@detroitmi.gov. That'd be a good way to forward any of that information along. I have a question that came over text. The question and comment is, we paid for the wide street when we bought the property. This would affect our value and selling feature. Bike lane might be better in the park. On the street causes more danger to bicycle riders. You will be taking away street parking for us. On the weekends, many people use both sides of the street on my area of Parkland. So certainly option one would have an impact to that. What's shown here is taking away parking on the entire side. the idea shown in option 2, because we're really just doing work at the intersection, just shows bump ins. So the loss of parking on this particular option would be much less. And in fact, the way that these are designed, based on Michigan Vehicle Code, which basically says you're supposed to stay 25 feet away from intersections when parking, the loss of parking in this option would actually be very minimal, if any, honestly. But good comment, and we will definitely log that for consideration. There is a question as well about, this is from Mr. Edge, whether the recording of this meeting and slides will be made available after the meeting. I believe that's the case, and I think that'll go right to the website that you found for this.
And so we have one more question from Harris LT. You can unmute yourself.
Okay, this is not a question. This is just supporting Ms. Ross. The time when the flooding happened to the basements, that was the time when they were doing the Constance prep project over there. And at another meeting, Ms. Ross spoke, or someone spoke of this before, and they said to send the reports to DWSD. So, but that all happened during the Constance project when you were prepping.
Okay, I'll look into it with our claims division as to whether or not we received anything. We'll also double back with the design team and DPW who were working on the project on our behalf at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with that, I think we've answered all of the questions and received comments. So we can now go to our first vote. And how we will handle this, again, here's our 2 options. I'm going to put these on the screen for you. I just saw a message come through, so make sure we didn't get to that in a minute. So our questions again were, of these 2 options, which do you prefer? So Marguerite, if you can launch our poll, you should get a prompt on your screen. And again, people on the phone, you are more than welcome to text in or email your responses as well. So we'll leave this up here for, again, about 1.5 minutes. I guess I would ask if anyone is having problems voting, things aren't coming up on their screen, feel free to raise hand and we can try to either help you a little bit or again, can repeat that information for texting and emailing. Okay, we've had the poll open for almost 2 minutes now and gotten a fair amount, majority of people voting here. Again, if you want a text or email those responses, your text number is 313-573-3320. Email swgroup@detroitmi.gov.
I'll end the polling now.
Okay, so our next discussion, we hinted at about it a few minutes ago with Mr. Edge's question about the area between Sawyer and Majestic. As we had talked about, we're going to have to bring that stormwater into some stormwater water quality practices before we discharge that to the Rouge River. And what we've identified is an area to do that in that open space between Majestic and Sawyer Streets. And that's kind of the north and south boundaries of it. And on the east side, obviously, is Outer Drive. And on the west side is Parkland. And another kind of softer boundary is that there's an existing ravine that cuts north from Outer Drive into the Rouge Park. So with this improvement, we're going to construct what we call an open channel drain. And so what you'll see here is that the stormwater pipes that are under Parkland and coming out of Majestic and Sawyer will what we call daylight, where you'll see the pipe end project into a channel within the park. And then that stormwater will flow in the channel and eventually collect in a pool at the east end and then flow again via pipe to the Rouge River. So there's certainly a significant amount of construction that is necessary to do that. And so that's going to provide us the ability to move the water, but also provide that water quality through naturalized practices using stormwater tolerant plants that can help to slow and filter the dirts and oils and other things that accumulate on the streets over time. So when we are done with that, we're going to have a responsibility to restore that. Obviously, to make sure that whatever we complete is sustainable, that it's going to be stable and not erosion prone. And then there's also an opportunity potentially for setting the table for future recreation or other park uses that are found in some of the planning documents that the Friends of Rouge Park has put together, as well as GSD. So here's a cross-sectional view of what the stormwater channel looks like. What we're trying to do is generate some fairly gentle slopes. So we have a label here we kind of call a 1-on-3 slope. So what that means is essentially it's rise over run. So for every 1 foot of vertical, we're going to walk out 3 feet. So the slope is intended to be fairly gradual, and it's going to extend down about 15 feet of depth. So at the very deepest point of this channel, it would be 15 feet below you standing. If you're on the edge up here, you're going to be looking down towards a 15-foot channel that's going to be fairly gradual in nature. The nature of this stormwater channel is that for the most part, you're not going to see water in it. It is intended to convey that stormwater from the neighborhood to the Rouge River. And because of the nature of our watershed upstream, where we have 215 or 218 acres of traditional dense residential neighborhood, the water flows off your driveways, it flows off your roofs, and it gets into the sewer system relatively quickly. And within an hour or two of most rain events, that water has already found its way down to the Rouge River. So that water is going to recede quickly, and it's going to go back to more of a dry type channel. The reality of that is in most cases that's pretty shallow, but you may have a situation that water gets to up towards of 5 feet deep, but that's in very large rain events. And again, the nature of this neighborhood in the watershed is that water will be at that point, and then it'll quickly recede as the stormwater, or excuse me, as the storm subsides. That stormwater will ultimately get to a point down here, and I'll use my pointer to kind of show you on this lower left portion of your screen. The water will flow this direction to this point, same as here. And this confluence point is where the water will join together and then flow to the east in the Rouge River. And we're going to create small settling pools in these locations. And so these will be surrounded with rock and boulders. And what the point of that is that this is an opportunity for sedimentation to occur. So we talked about the things that accumulate on streets over time. This is a spot where that water can slow down and those can settle out. And so this can be maintained every so often, where a contractor or DWSD may come in and scoop out those sediments and haul those away to a landfill or some other sort of processing facility. But the rest of the channel is largely maintained. So there's gonna be 3 of those. This is the main one that you'll find here at the main outfall, and then there will be one here at the end of Sawyer and another one at the end of Majestic. These will hold water most of the time, but they're gonna be fairly small in nature. The design of these is that they're essentially pools. So our outlet pipe sits here, but our pools sit about 2 feet below that. And that's an intentional way for us to allow that to settle out. So how are these particular areas restored? We have basically 2 kind of conditions. We have areas down here on the lower portion of the channel where they're susceptible to seeing water. The lower portions see it pretty often, and as you go up further, because that requires a larger and larger rainstorm, they'll see it less and less. But we still want to make sure that whatever we put in can withstand occasional inundation. So we have one particular planting style here, and then north of, or excuse me, uphill of that, and kind of this area here, you'll have a different type of palette. So this is that wet mesic area. So this is down in the bottoms of the channel. We might have, these are just representative types of native mixes that you might find in that area. And this will also be restored with proper, we call erosion control matting, to make sure that we don't lose our seed and topsoil once that gets placed. And then in the upper areas, it might be more of a prairie style seed mixture that exists there. And our goal is that that would extend up to the banks of the channel. And then after that, it would return to more of a traditional turf grass that we see within the park. And so how does this all work itself into some of the master plans and things that are going on? This particular green circle that you see here is about the location where the stormwater practice will exist. And so what we've done here is we brought in the master plan from Fresno Rouge Park, and we can see there's a vision for an upland forest trail through here that kind of winds its way through the park and then follows the ravine here and returns to a loop. And there's also a sidewalk. It's kind of shown along the edge here, a perimeter pathway. So this is envisioned as open space. And then over here, there's kind of a mixture of more program type uses with the playground, comfort station, picnic shelter, that types of thing. So there's a mixture of both programmed and passive type uses here. And so is there opportunity where our project can work to accentuate those? So here's another spot where we start to get into some of the options for consideration. And we're going to throw 3 different options at you at this point. Our first option, we're going to call it concept, is what we call no mounds. And so when we say no mounds, what are we referring to? Well, again, as I mentioned, with our stormwater system, we're going to be cutting down with excavation 15 feet in many areas, and it's going to be a fairly wide excavation. And so when we do that, we have to find a use for that particular soil. So one option might be that we simply take that soil and we truck it to a different location, either within the city for other projects that might be going on, whether it's park improvements or other city uses, or that material is just hauled off altogether and disposed of in appropriate landfills. So that's a very viable option. We can take that earth and haul it away, and then basically just leave this as open space as it is now. And this would all be left as is. And whenever improvements happen in the future, we're just going off of what's there in an existing condition. We are talking though that when we do this, there's an opportunity for us at a minimum that we can, because we are impacting the park, we can do some of the things like adding in the trail that was envisioned as part of the master plan. We can run that right along the stormwater practice. Again, the nature of that is it's going to have a mixture of some prairie type seed mixes, and it'll be an interesting feature too, when there is rain events, and if you're out here after, there'll be the sounds of running water for at least a couple hours as things subside. So it could be a space that could be interesting experience for people to pass by. A second option is, what if we take some of that earth and we use it on site? And so this would take this earth, and being sensitive to the fact that there's kind of some long-term visions for these areas up here with open space, maybe we just do more of a mounding here. And so this would create a mound that would be roughly maybe 15 feet in height. And we take that dirt and basically fill it there. And that's something that could be just restored with grass seed in that particular location. Again, we would do the trail, but it creates a little bit of interesting earthwork here for this particular location. Maybe a third option. So maybe we don't go quite as high with the hills, but we do more of a rolling terrain. So we take that earthwork and we spread it out. So maybe we create some rolling turf here, north side of the ravine. We do it south of our channel, and we do it in the middle area. So we just create more of a rolling type environment. What might that look like? So we just threw a few reference images. These are from an area in Hines Park, where I think Hines Drive and 6 Mile roughly. This is all fill material that was placed within the park. And you can see it has some natural roll to it. And that's generally what we kind of had in mind, not to create anything that looks like a stockpile. We want to make it work with the landscape. So these are kind of, again, 3 fairly distinct options about how we can work with the earthwork that we generate as part of this trail. Again, option 1 is no mounds, take all that dirt off site and use it somewhere else. Option 2 is to create a mound on Parkland. And one of the things too about that is it would actually create a little bit of a visual shield. So you wouldn't necessarily see across into Outer Drive, and you wouldn't see the channel as much if you were to do that particular option. Option 3 is we take that earth and we spread it out years all the way around the trail, and we do that in a much more gradual nature where it's only a few feet high as opposed to a 15-foot high mound in that type of installation. So with that, before we do the polling again, we wanted to again open it up to questions. And so anyone that has questions can raise their hands. And I think we've gotten a couple texts as well. So right off the bat, I think we have Mr. Edge question. Marguerite, do you want to unmute?
Yep.
Yes, hello again. All right, my first question is, but I think it might be answered. The photos you showed, people walking on the east side of the slopes. How far is the slope going to start from Parkland?
So go to here. I think this.
Yeah,
you're thinking. Are you thinking more of this cross-sectional view here?
That one, where you
Okay.
got people on each side of the slope, the pooling area. How
Yeah.
far does the slope start? Is that from the trail, or is that from Parkland on the left side of the photo?
So this particular photo is if you were envision yourself standing about 100 feet to the west of Outer Drive and looking this way.
Okay.
So the way that we designed it is that we wouldn't really start any sort of excavation until roughly 80 feet off of Parkland, and then we would start with our descent down into the channel. We wanted to provide as much buffer as we could off of Parkland, but we still need a certain length of channel to make sure that we have the ability to settle out any of the dirts and things we pick up off the streets.
Okay, from Parkland, that 80 feet, again, that's doing a great impact on where we do our annual picnic at.
And then just for clarification, that 80 feet is an impact right at the ends of Majestic and Sawyer.
Yeah.
But then in this area here, it stays, at least under one of the options, would stay wide open as is.
Okay.
So that's still pretty wide open.
Okay, then the other thing with all this fill material that you are, excavation material that you are removing, putting hills and things, I don't like that. And I'm looking at, this is all going to be clean material. So I suggest that maybe you can get with the demolition department, because we have thousands of houses that once the demolition program starts back up, that they're going to need. So it may be somewhere that DWSD can stockpile this for the demolition department to move forward to backfill a lot of these holes. Because I can imagine that the material is clean material and can be used for backfilling demolition sites.
Go
ahead.
To that point, that is a conversation we would have to have. I'm not sure of the nature of the fill material. A lot of times things in Detroit you think are clean are not. And so, you know, that would be a question for them in terms of if they want to incur the cost to hold it, to store it, and to test it. But we will definitely consider that and make sure that we engage with them and let them know.
Okay, yes, all material that is used for demolition now is tested to make sure it is clean, because it's going back into neighborhoods. But most material that comes from neighborhood to residential area, 90% of the time it is clean material and can be used for backfill of demolition projects. That's just something I'm throwing out there.
Yeah, agreed. I'm always concerned about that 10% and who has the onus once they test it.
Yeah, again, everything is tested anyways when it does come from neighborhood to neighborhood.
Right. It would just be a matter of, I'm saying, I don't want us as DWSD to test it, because if there's something wrong, I don't want the onus for having to do something with it.
Yes, okay.
Got it. So we'll talk with them. I'll have Lisa get with LaJuan and let her know as we get, you know, closer to that phase.
Okay.
And to add to Valencia's comments, I just want to say that it is, we have to also coordinate with the park, PDD and GSD. We have to coordinate with them when working in the park. So they also have thoughts on what to do with the dirt. So I just want to make sure we're all aware that we are also have to work with the parks.
Okay, yes, if GSD doesn't want it, or Parks and Recs doesn't want it, then that's just another option I'm throwing out there, instead of all these big hills and berms that we're talking about putting up.
Thank you. That's really good input. Thank you so much.
Okay. I'm finished. Thank you.
Mr. Edge.
Right. Okay, so Dinkert, we'll get to you. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello, this is Peggy Dankert. It was my understanding that Great Lakes Water Authority had a, I think, sewer line project going through the park along Outer Drive. Are you familiar with that?
I'm personally not familiar with a sewer along Outer Drive.
Hey, this is Palencia speaking. I will double back with them. I'm not certain. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a West Sider, but I get confused when I get over in Rouge Park. I can't see the particular alignment. I do think GLWA did have some work that they were going to be doing, but I can't see the alignment right now in my head as soon as you said Outer Drive. So we will double back with them on that.
Thank you. Yeah, the reason Outer Drive along there is in very poor condition, the street itself. But then I saw the Great Lakes plan for work, and it's like, I thought to myself, well, there's no, if, you know, they're going to be having a lot of underground stuff. There's not much sense on working on the road on Untitled that might be affected by underground water and sewer construction. So I would really recommend that y'all get together with them, because your work might impinge on each other. Okay, I'm I missed the beginning of it, and perhaps you dealt with it there, but the new storm sewer lines that are coming, that are being placed in the off the streets, how deep underground are they?
So when our storm sewers discharge, and again, I'll do a little quick highlight, they flow in this general direction into the park. These two lines are going to be somewhere about 15 to 20 feet deep. So it depends on where you're at in the park, but it's generally that's where our depth will be.
And so what does that depth compare with the storm sewer line that will be installed in the street?
It'll be essentially the same elevation.
So there's no incline.
There'll be very gradual, especially with large diameter pipe. The slopes are very, very gradual.
Okay. Because there tends to be lots of garbage goes down those drains. What else did I have? There was one other thing. I'll put my hand up again when I remember. Sorry.
Okay.
Great, thanks. And then Patrick, we do have some questions that have either been emailed or sent in through the text.
Yes. So it looks like we have one about the question about mosquitoes. So the question is, are these basins going to attract mosquitoes? Is there going to be fencing barrier so no young children going to the park are in danger? So I'll start with mosquitoes. We mentioned how these are going to be stormwater management practices or water quality practices. The goal is that the vast majority of stormwater is basically no longer within the channel within a couple hours of a storm event. We did talk about these pools. The pools will be the only areas that there's standing water. These are all going to be rock lined with basically the goal being to help settle out and dissipate any fast moving water to make sure it doesn't erode. So the vast majority of this system will not have water standing in it, but these pools will. And so with the size of them being relatively small and fairly well separated from the neighborhood by, over, when you kind of measure from where the pool is to the closest home, it's going to be well over probably 150 feet. They will be offset from the homes in the neighborhood. The question about fencing, we've made a design approach right now is that we would not have fencing alongside of the channel. By allowing the prairie plantings to go a little bit beyond the border, those will be left natural. They would not be mowed. So that really should discourage people from walking down within them, because it'll be a fairly, I'll say, unmowed condition. But everything beyond that would be turf grass. So at this time, fencing is not proposed. Are there any other questions, Marguerite, you're aware of?
So we have one person raising their hand. All right, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, this is Jack Smiley. Unfortunately, I missed the first part of the presentation, but is this pretty much a done deal?
Valencia, do you want to address that, or when you say done deal?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yep. So what do you mean when you say done deal?
Well, are you moving forward regardless? I think whoever came up with this has little regard for the park.
So,
I mean, we had that so-called green infrastructure at Tireman, which is a disaster. It's ugly. and this will just be more ugliness in the park.
So, Mr. Smiley, because you did miss the beginning of the meeting, we did address the issues associated with Tireman, particularly the residential bioswales, as well as the bioswales that were created as an extension of the residential bioswales. And so we did address that issue. There is an issue associated with the contractor. We are trying to work to get the areas replanted with the types of plantings that, you know, we originally specified that did not take in certain instances. And so we did address that specific issue. At present, this is the plan. This plan is consistent with master planning that has been done both by the Great Lakes Water Authority and the Detroit Water and Sewage Department. It is the most economically feasible plan to achieve regulatory compliance for combined sewer overflow control. As you know, as part of your bill in the city of Detroit, you pay something called a drainage charge. And those who stay in this area are very, very well aware of the $1 billion+ that was supposed to be spent to put in another tunnel, or to put in a tunnel to parallel the existing interceptor that does run through the park. And so this particular option arose as one of the most economically feasible options to allow us to eliminate an untreated discharge at West Warren. And so as such, this particular project is moving forward. We're going to continue to engage with residents and obtain feedback as we go through the varying processes associated with the design we did in this meeting. But yes, the project itself will be happening.
Well, it seems that it's only economically feasible if you don't value the park. And I see the destruction of this park as it's very regrettable if this moves forward. In the name of green infrastructure, it's kind of a scam. This is really going to take away some really high quality natural habitat, and there's no two ways around it. You can't plant things and have it be aesthetically pleasing. It's just going to be a scar in the park forever.
Well, our goal is to make it an amenity, and we also do not want it to be a scar on the park. So that's not our goal, and we also take it very seriously that it needs to be an amenity and pleasing.
We have tried with just the layout of this to try to hug as much of the existing assets as possible. So, you know, whether it's running alongside of the existing stormwater ravine that's already present and staying just shy of that, so we're basically against it but not impacting some of the existing vegetation, to also trying to push up against Outer Drive. We're really trying to minimize the impacts of the park as much as possible. And certainly some of your comments about, and some of the others about how it's being used, want you to consider that and you know, the different options that were proposed and how those may or may not work out with, you know, with what your goals are personally for the park.
And this is Barry from DWC, if I may chime in. I think the key thing we had mentioned, like you said, you missed the earlier part, is that the contract for Tireman was not held directly by DWC. And DWC will be holding this contract directly. So we're able to pull from lessons learned, and we're incorporating language into the contract to better the maintenance and establishment of the plantings.
Well, you haven't learned then, because it's a fundamental flaw to have built that in the first place.
No, for this project that we're presenting to you today is what
Mr. Smiley, you are entitled to your opinion. We respect your opinion. And Patrick, I think we probably need to move on to the next slide, because I think we don't have that many minutes left before closure of the meeting. So we respect your opinion. We heard your opinion, and you are entitled to that. Thank you.
Okay. Two other small questions. The comment was keep the trails consistently in the park from Warren to West Parkway. And I'm not sure if it's necessarily a question, but just a comment. And a question is that this is very sandy soil. Is this good fill soil? And so just touch very briefly on the soils. As part of this project and prior projects, DWSD has pretty extensive data on the nature of the soils. In this particular area, we found it's actually fairly tight clays in this particular area, but that'll all be part of our strategy, whatever we do, whether we fill on site or haul away, characterizing what that soil is and using it appropriately will be part of that. Any other questions?
So we do have 2 more people raising their hands. Patrick, we could continue with questions at this time, or we could ask that people hold their questions until another point at this presentation a little bit later, or use a Q&A function or text or email.
Okay, I guess I'm thinking. It looks like we have a bird, B-U-R-D, that we haven't heard from before. In respecting people's time, I think let's get a comment from that, and then Peggy, maybe if we could take your question at the end, if that's okay.
All right, Bird.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I sent my questions through the question and answers. So if you want to take someone else, that's fine. I'll just wait for my questions to be answered. Totally up to you.
Okay, we can answer those. We'll send messages to those questions, and I think with that we can move on to the voting if that's okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you though.
That's fine. I'm going to add a couple of more questions. So when should I expect answers to the questions I'm asking?
We will have those answered in the next few minutes for sure.
Okay, perfect.
We'll answer right in there. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. So again, if you do have those questions, you can type them into the Q&A and we will answer them as best we can. So with that, let's get to the voting portion. And this is, again, looking for your feedback on these 3 options. Option 1 was we construct the stormwater channel and then we basically leave everything around that as is. We haul all that material off site. Option 2 is we use some of that material and we create a larger, say 15-foot high hill within the area between the channel and Parkland Street. And we leave the areas along Outer Drive as is. And option 3 is we take that material and we basically create undulating and kind of rolling terrain around the feature as we saw in those photos. So with that, Marguerite, if you want to launch our poll and we can get people's opinions.
Yep. Okay, so everyone should see the poll little pop-up on their screen. And then again, if you are calling in on your phone, you can email or call your response, option 2 or 3.
And that phone number again, if you're texting, is 313-573-3320. Email is swgroup@detroitmi.gov. And we'll leave this open for 1.5 minutes as we did last time.
Great. So it's been about a minute and a half. So if everyone can kind of get in their final answers, and we will end polling in the next couple seconds here. All right. Okay, I will end the polling.
Okay, well, we thank everybody for your response on that. And again, we are going to take these results and add them with any responses that we get over email and text. So we have a representative cross-section of all opinions on these two issues. So with that, we can kind of just hit on our next steps, and then we'll close up with a final question and answer opportunity. So we're going to collect, again, your responses that we got here today, as well as any others that come in. So if there's any of your neighbors that were not able to attend tonight, that still want to learn more, again, we talked about this presentation being posted to the website, detroitmi.gov/West Warren Stormwater, where you found this link today. There'll also be the emails on there if they want to provide any comments or votes to these poll questions. Next steps relative to what you'll see in the neighborhood is that there will be some field work that occurs in the next few weeks. As Palencia mentioned at the start, in addition to our stormwater work, we also want to make sure that the other DWSD assets, such as the water main and the sanitary or combined sewer, are in good working order as we complete this project. So in order to do that, there will be sewer investigations that will be ongoing. That'll be with DWSD contractors. They'll be in the neighborhood. You'll see them and they'll have ID and practicing all the requirements, per city requirements relative to COVID-19. We'll also have a residential downspout survey that's conducted, and this will be done from the sidewalk, basically. So you may see consultant staff in the neighborhood. Typically, they'll be wearing the safety, high visibility safety vests, and they'll have ID on them as well. So if you see them looking at houses and entering data, what they're really just trying to find out is whether downspouts are connected or not. Because one of the things that we are potentially looking at is finding opportunities to help encourage disconnections of those downspouts to get as much of that relatively clean stormwater into our new storm sewer system instead of into the combined sewer system. Relative to design, we'll collect all the results here based on our polls today, and then the next few days, as well as folks take a look at the website and submit information. And we'll use that to finalize the design work, finalizing our construction plans and the work within the park. And then ultimately putting together bidding documents that will be put out to the public for public bid with the hope of starting, certainly we should be underway by this time next year, if not earlier, with phase 1 of construction. And so with that, we can again kind of open it up to any remaining questions that the group might have. So again, raise hands if you're on the phone, *9, or use the raise hand feature. Just for reference, it's 8 o'clock right now, so we can maybe spend the next 5 to 10 minutes. I think that'd be fine.
So I'm not seeing any raised hands so far. We can maybe, Patrick, we can go to the Q&A and see if we can take a look at those while we wait for folks to raise their hands.
Sure. Just on the Q&A, there's a question or two. One was about whether we could use some of this earth as part of the, there's a mound over at Joy and Lasser. What I would say in that is that, as Palencia mentioned earlier, there's some opportunities for us to work with other departments about where that material could go to. So I know GSD is joined on the call with us tonight. They have a lot of active projects that could use this type of material. And so the conversations will be ongoing between the groups to find out if we do move that dirt off site, where we can go.
Hey, Patrick.
Yeah.
That particular site, I looked at the contours. The issue with that site at Joy and Lazar is that the mound is more or less already peaked out. So there's like a little bit at the tip that we could maybe fit a little bit more soil, but it'd be very difficult to make it higher just because the way the hill is constructed, it's almost at its point, right? We could basically finish the point of it, but that wouldn't give us a lot of fill volume. We could make it a few feet higher, but at that point, then we reach the tip of the pyramid, so to speak, and there's nowhere else to go without it getting really unstable.
Okay. With that, I think we've answered most of the questions. We're going to, again, take all this information, compile it, and we will use that to finalize our design. I guess there was a question about the results of the polls. Suppose that's something we can take all this information and combine it and maybe do a summary document at some point to kind of reflect some of the feedback we heard. If that makes sense. Lisa, Palencia, anything you want to wrap up with?
Sure. So I just want to thank everyone for their time and patience during this process. I know that this new normal is very, very difficult. And though we are all trying to move forward in spite of everything that's going on, you know, I hope you know that DWSD is continuing to work hard for you. I know at times we don't always get it right, but we try very hard to do better than we did before. And so we want to thank you all for your time, and we will continue to engage with you as we move through this process. And with that, I'm sure we can close the meeting and say good night.
Sounds great. We thank you all for joining us.